I used to think betrayal would come in shadows, in lies whispered behind closed doors, in late nights explained away by too much work, in subtle changes I would only notice years later. I never imagined it would come so brazenly, dropped into the center of my chest like a bomb, with Ethan staring at me as though I should already understand. It started with a ping on my phone. Our group chat, the one we'd shared since college, just the three of us, Ethan, Sophia, and me. It had always been our space for jokes, random memes, and half-baked plans. But tonight, as I wiped down the kitchen counter, the notification pulled me into a message that didn't belong. Sophia Reed, so when do we tell her officially? She'll come around, Ethan. She has to. I froze, cloth still damp in my hand. At first, I thought she had sent it to the wrong chat. But then I saw Ethan typing beneath her words. Ethan Brooks, I'll talk to her tonight. She won't believe it unless she hears it from me. My throat tightened, heat crawling into my face. My fingers hovered over the phone, unwilling to respond. Instead, I listened, because above me, from the half-closed door of our bedroom, their voices carried faintly through. Sophia's laugh. That light, airy lilt that always masked sharpness underneath. Ethan's hushed reply. A man's voice, my husband's voice, waited with a seriousness I hadn't heard in months. She won't fight it if I make it clear. She still trusts me. I pressed my hand flat against the countertop, willing myself not to storm up there, not to demand answers before I had heard it all. The betrayal seeped in with every word, thick and undeniable. When I finally pushed open the door, Ethan was perched on the edge of the bed, Sophia standing too close, her perfume flooding the room. They both turned like startled actors caught mid-scene. Emma, Ethan said, my name catching awkwardly in his throat. We were just planning. My voice cracked, trembling between fury and disbelief. On my bed. Sophia's smile was faint, almost pitying. Emma, it's not what you think. You have to let him go, eventually. We all know this isn't real anymore. I looked at Ethan, waiting, hoping he would dismiss her, laugh, pull me into his arms and tell me this was some tasteless joke. Instead, he dropped his gaze and spoke softly, almost rehearsed. I want a divorce. The words didn't land immediately. They hung in the air like smoke, blurring everything I thought I knew. My chest tightened as if someone had tied ropes around my ribs. A divorce? I whispered. You don't mean that. It's just, it'll be easier for everyone, he said, glancing at Sophia like she was cueing his lines. You know how things are between us. This doesn't have to be permanent, Emma. Think of it as, he hesitated, searching for the phrase. A way to reset. A performance. Something temporary. A show. He thought this was a show. Sophia tilted her head, eyes gleaming. If you really love him, you'll let him go. We're not trying to hurt you. Her words sliced, each one polished with fake sympathy. But all I could hear was Ethan's silence, his choice, his betrayal. The boy I had grown up with, the man I had promised forever to, now stood before me, not as my husband but as a stranger delivering a script someone else had written. My hands shook, but my voice came out steady. If this is a performance, Ethan, then you should know, I don't act. And I don't pretend. If you're asking me to walk away, don't expect me to come back. For a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes, doubt, maybe fear, but Sophia's hand brushed his arm, anchoring him to her side. And in that instant, I knew the truth, this wasn't a joke, wasn't a bluff. He had already chosen her. And for the first time in our entire story, I realized I might have to choose myself. The night after Ethan's words, I want a divorce. I sat in the quiet of our living room, the clock ticking too loudly against the silence. Every corner of this house carried echoes of us, memories carved into the walls, shadows of laughter that felt both near and impossibly distant. I pulled the old wooden box from beneath the coffee table, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were scraps of our story, photographs, ticket stubs, folded letters that smelled faintly of ink and time. A history built with the kind of certainty I thought could never be undone. Ethan and I had grown up 2 streets apart. I still remember the summer heat of our first meeting, my scraped knees from falling off my bike, and his hand stretched out to pull me up. You're tougher than you look, he had said, grinning through the gap of a missing tooth. From that moment on, we had been inseparable, my shadow in every game, my confidant in every secret. We grew together in the rhythm of small-town life. School dances where he tripped over his own feet but never let go of my hand, nights on the hood of his old car staring at constellations we couldn't name, whispered promises of a future neither of us could picture clearly but both believed in absolutely. When my mother passed away, leaving behind her wedding ring, delicate, gold, with a single modest stone, it was Ethan who slipped it onto my finger at 19, swearing it would one day be replaced with a ring of his own. "Until I can promise you everything," he'd said. And I had believed him. That ring became my anchor, my reminder that no matter the storms, he would stay. I held that ring now, twisting it around my finger as though it might give me answers. Instead, it only deepened the ache in my chest. How could the boy who had carried my grief, the man who had sworn forever, stand in our bedroom beside another woman and speak of divorce as if it were theater? I thought of the house we bought. My parents' old home, renovated with laughter and paint-stained clothes. The creak in the stair we never fixed, the mural we painted in the spare room when we thought children might someday fill it. Every corner whispered of a shared dream, a blueprint we sketched together in youthful confidence. Now those whispers mocked me. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the night settle over the yard where Ethan and I once strung up fairy lights for our first anniversary. I could almost hear his voice then, low and certain, "No matter where life takes us, this is home." Home. The word felt like ash now. The betrayal wasn't just in his choice of Sophia. It was in the years he had stolen from me, the foundation we built together, now crumbling because he decided it was all for show. And yet, even as fury simmered beneath my skin, grief drowned me. Because beneath the hurt, I still saw him as the boy who once held me while I cried, who taught me how to skip stones, who promised me forever under a canopy of stars. But forever, it seemed, had an expiration date. And I was left holding the remnants of a dream no longer mine. Our house no longer felt like mine. It had become a stage, one where I was the forgotten extra, lingering in the background while Sophia claimed center spotlight. At first, her presence was subtle, a perfume that clung to Ethan's shirt, a lipstick stain on a glass left in the sink, her name flashing across his phone in the middle of dinner. But soon the subtlety vanished. She began to seep into the very walls, as though she had the right to carve herself into a life I had spent years building. Her voice arrived in the mornings, calling Ethan before I'd even poured my coffee. Her laughter spilled through the speaker, loud enough for me to hear from across the room. He didn't bother to lower the volume anymore. "Babe, I'll call you back," Ethan would say, meeting my stare with a shrug, as though I were the intruder. By the second week, Sophia herself was appearing in our doorway, all silk dresses and easy smiles, acting as though this house belonged to her too. She'd leave her cardigan draped over the back of our couch, her hairpins on the bathroom counter. Once, I found a half-empty bottle of her perfume on our dresser, a deliberate mark of territory, I was sure. Ethan never asked her to stop. In fact, he encouraged it. "It's not a big deal, Emma," he said when I confronted him, my voice shaking with the strain of keeping calm. "Sophia and I are just comfortable around each other. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder. The word stuck in my throat. As if I were the one who had broken us. I stopped arguing. Instead, I turned inward. If Ethan was intent on handing her the keys to our life, then I would take control of the things I still could. I began sorting through the bills, the mortgage papers, the savings account we once spoke of as, for the future. I had never paid much attention. Ethan insisted on handling finances, and I had trusted him. But now I sit at the dining table night after night, papers spread around me like a fortress, forcing myself to learn every number, every detail. It wasn't easy. My hands trembled the first time I logged into the joint account, the balance glaring back at me. I made lists, what was his, what I could claim as mine, what I would need if I walked away. It felt like preparing for war, arming myself with knowledge instead of weapons. The house itself seemed to rebel against me. Every creak of the stairs reminded me of nights we'd climbed them hand in hand. The mural in the spare room, stars and colors we once painted together in laughter, felt like a cruel joke now. And yet, in those rooms, I began packing pieces of myself, old photo albums, my mother's ring box, clothes tucked into suitcases I slid under the bed. Quiet preparations for a departure Ethan still believed I'd never make. One evening, as Sophia's perfume drifted down the hall and Ethan's laughter echoed with hers from the bedroom, I sat in the kitchen with a stack of bills and a glass of wine. For the first time, I felt a spark of control, however fragile. The house might be divided, my heart fractured, but piece by piece I was reclaiming myself. I didn't know when I would leave. But I knew now, with every cardigan Sophia left behind, with every smirk she flashed in my direction, that my staying was temporary. This was no longer a home. It was a battleground. And I was done surrendering ground. Family gatherings used to be my safe haven. My aunt's living room always smelled of roasted garlic and lemon polish, cousins running wild with sticky fingers, my uncle telling the same jokes we'd all memorized years ago. It was a place of familiarity, of warmth, of belonging. This time, it felt like a stage I hadn't agreed to perform on. Ethan arrived late, Sophia at his side, their hands brushing too easily, their smiles rehearsed. A hush fell over the room when they entered, relatives glancing between me and them with barely concealed discomfort. I felt every stare like a pinprick to my skin. I tried to steady myself, clutching a glass of water too tightly as I sat among my cousins. But Sophia thrived in the spotlight. She swept across the room with that effortless charm of hers, greeting relatives she had no right to know, laughing at stories she had never been part of. Ethan stayed close to her, his arm resting casually against the small of her back, the same touch that once anchored me in a crowded room. I told myself to breathe, to survive the night with dignity intact. But then I heard it. I had slipped into the hallway for air, away from the suffocating chatter, when their voices floated from the kitchen. Sophia's laugh, smooth and cutting, carried through the doorway. "She won't actually leave him," Sophia said, words dripping with contempt disguised as amusement. "Emma's too meek. This whole divorce thing is just for show. She'll cling to him, no matter what." My breath caught. Ethan's reply came low, almost indulgent. "She's stubborn, but she'll get over it. She always does." The walls seemed to tilt. Their words struck harder than any shout, sharper than any slap. For show. That's what they thought of me. A placeholder. A prop. Humiliation burned hot through my veins, my cheeks stinging as though I had been physically struck. But beneath the shame, something else stirred, steady, cold, and unyielding. I walked back into the living room, each step deliberate. My family's chatter dulled as I passed through, but I didn't stop. I didn't explain. I simply set my glass down on the nearest table, picked up my coat, and left. Outside, the night air was sharp against my skin, but it cleared my head like nothing else could. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. Not to call Ethan. Not to confront Sophia. To call a lawyer. My voice shook when I left the message. "Hi, this is Emma Carter. I need to discuss filing for divorce." The words tasted foreign on my tongue, but they were real. More real than Ethan's promises. More real than Sophia's games. As I slid into my car, silence wrapping around me, I realized something monumental. They had underestimated me. They believed I would stay, endure, swallow humiliation just to cling to the ghost of what Ethan and I once were. But I wouldn't. If they wanted a show, I would give them something unexpected, the sight of me walking away. And this time, I wouldn't look back. The dinner had been planned weeks ago, before the word divorce had even entered my world. A quiet evening with mutual friends at a small bistro downtown, the kind of night meant to break routine and share laughter over too much wine. I nearly cancelled, but something inside me insisted on going. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was the need to prove to myself that I could still walk into a room with Ethan at my side without breaking apart. But when we arrived, Ethan wasn't at my side. He walked in with Sophia, her hand curled possessively around his arm as though daring anyone to question it. Conversations dipped into awkward silence, eyes flickering between me, Ethan, and her. I sat across from them, my glass of water trembling against the linen tablecloth. Every time Sophia leaned in to whisper something into his ear, every time his lips twitched in response, the tension wound tighter around my ribs. Our friends tried to smooth it over, filling the air with small talk, but it couldn't hold forever. The breaking point came when Sophia laughed at something Ethan said and brushed her hand across his chest, right there, in front of everyone. I stiffened. One of our friends shifted uncomfortably. The air turned brittle. I set my fork down, the clink sharp enough to turn heads. "Really, Ethan?" He glanced at me, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Emma, don't do this here." "I'm not the one doing anything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You brought her here. For dinner. With our friends." Sophia smirked, tilting her head. "Why shouldn't I be here? Ethan wants me here." I looked at her, then back at him. "And what about me? Does my humiliation entertain you both?" Ethan exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. "You're overreacting, Emma. You always make everything harder than it needs to be. Sophia's not trying to hurt you, this is just how things are now." You need to accept it. The words landed like stones. Accept it. As if my marriage were nothing more than a piece of furniture he'd decided to rearrange. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the floor, startling the table into silence. No, Ethan. I don't need to accept anything. You want divorce? You'll have it. You want her. I gestured at Sophia, whose smirk faltered just slightly. Then take her. But don't expect me to sit here and play along, as if I'm the extra in whatever performance you've decided this is. His face paled. Emma. No. My voice cut sharper than I'd ever heard it. You made your choice. And tonight, I'm making mine. I stood, my pulse pounding in my ears, and left the table. Behind me, I heard the shuffle of chairs, whispered apologies, Sophia's low hiss of satisfaction. But I didn't look back. On the street, the cool night air hit my face, and for the first time, I felt something solid beneath the wreckage of humiliation and grief. Resolve. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me to swallow this, to let Sophia slip into my place while I faded into the background. But I wouldn't. If Ethan wanted the performance of divorce, I would give him the reality of it. And it would be his turn to live with the silence I left behind. The clock read 12:47 a.m. when my phone began to buzz against the nightstand. I was awake, though I'd been lying in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the dinner in my head. The way Sophia had draped herself across Ethan, the way he had dismissed me like I was an inconvenience, not a wife. When I saw his name glowing on the screen, my stomach knotted. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out. But habit, or maybe curiosity, made me swipe to answer. Emma, Ethan's voice came through, low and uneven. I could hear traffic in the background, maybe the hum of a car radio. Please don't hang up. Just, listen. I said nothing. The silence stretched, forcing him to fill it. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he said quickly. The dinner, the things Sophia said, that wasn't me. She pushes me, you know how she is. She said it'd be good to make things dramatic, so you take the divorce seriously. But it was never supposed to hurt you. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. So what was it supposed to do, Ethan? Entertain me? Humiliate me quietly instead of publicly? He sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that used to signal he was tired of arguing. Don't twist this, Emma. You always do that. You blow things out of proportion. You know I care about you. I'm trying to figure things out. Sophia's, he cut himself off. She's helping me think. My hand tightened around the phone. Helping him think. That's what he called it. In the background, I thought I heard her voice faintly, laughing at something. My chest burned. You stood in front of our friends tonight, I said slowly, every word deliberate, and you let her disrespect me. You let her call what we had a show. And you defended her. You did that, Ethan. Not Sophia. You. His voice softened, pleading. I didn't mean it. I swear, Emma, you're still the most important person in my life. I need space. I need you to understand that this is temporary. We can fix this later. For years, I would have melted at that tone. For years, I would have clung to those words, desperate to believe them. But lying in that bed, with my mother's wedding ring cool against my skin, I felt something shift inside me. He wanted me to believe this was temporary. That I would wait quietly while he toyed with another woman, while he decided what part one would play in his life. But I wasn't a prop. I wasn't a placeholder. You keep calling it temporary, I whispered, staring into the darkness. But Ethan, there's nothing temporary about the way you've broken us. You don't get to tear me apart and then ask me to hold still until you're ready to fix it. Emma, please. No, my voice trembled, but I didn't waver. You've already made your choice. Now I'm making mine. There was a long pause. I could hear his breath on the other end, uneven, maybe even desperate, but I no longer cared. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet, almost childlike. So that's it? You're just leaving? Yes, I said. I'm surviving. With or without you. I ended the call before he could respond, the final click echoing louder in my ears than his voice ever had. The silence afterward was not the hollow ache I expected. It was heavy, yes, but in its weight there was clarity. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for him. I wasn't waiting for apologies, or explanations, or a miracle that would stitch us back together. I was waiting for myself, for the life I was about to build. And that realization was the beginning of my freedom. I should have known better than to check my phone that morning. Some part of me, foolish and bruised, was still searching for an apology that would never come, a message from Ethan, maybe, or even silence that might mean he was thinking of me. Instead, what I found was a declaration. A photo. It was the two of them, Ethan and Sophia, standing in front of a downtown cafe we used to love, his arm wrapped around her waist, her lips tilted in a smile I knew was meant to cut. The caption beneath read, "New beginnings deserve honesty. No more hiding. 2 hearts." My throat tightened. The likes were already climbing, mutual friends leaving comments that twisted the knife deeper. "So happy for you two. You make such a beautiful couple. Finally, it's out in the open. Finally," as if I had been the secret. As if I had been the obstacle to their happiness. I scrolled further, bile rising with every post. Another photo, Ethan holding Sophia's hand across a dinner table, wine glasses raised. The caption, "She understands me in ways no one else ever could." And then, the one that broke me, a story clip of Sophia, laughing into the camera, her head leaning on his shoulder. Her voice floated through the speakers, syrupy sweet but sharp as a blade. "Emma will be fine. She always pretends she's stronger than she really is." My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. The humiliation roared through me, a wildfire of shame, anger, grief. To see our life paraded online, to have my pain turned into their performance, was a cruelty I hadn't thought Ethan capable of. But beneath the humiliation, something else rose, colder, steadier. A truth that had been growing quietly inside me ever since that midnight call. This was no longer about saving anything. There was nothing left to salvage. If Ethan wanted the world to see his new beginning, then I would begin mine too, not in secret, not in shame, but with finality. I closed the app, my reflection staring back at me in the darkened screen. My face was pale, eyes swollen, but there was steel there I hadn't seen before. I reached for the folder I'd been building, bills sorted, account numbers written, lawyer's card tucked inside. My hand didn't tremble this time. They thought I would wither under their spotlight, humiliated into silence. But humiliation had teeth, and mine had sharpened into resolve. Let them post their pictures, their captions, their jabs. Let the world applaud their love story. Because when the papers were signed, when the house was no longer his, when the silence of my absence settled in, that was when Ethan would learn the difference between a show and reality. And I would no longer be the one watching from the sidelines. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and ink. The shelves behind his desk were lined with thick volumes whose spines bore words like equity, marital dissolution, custody. Words that once belonged to other people's nightmares. Now they were mine. I sat across from him, hands folded so tightly my knuckles ached. He spoke in measured tones, explaining documents, outlining options, the rhythm of his voice both distant and grounding. I nodded, not because I understood every word, but because I had no choice but to. When he slid the divorce papers toward me, my signature shook at first, then steadied. Each letter I wrote felt like a chain snapping loose. Ethan once said marriage was forever. He had whispered it against my neck on our wedding night, his hands warm against mine. But forever had become something Sophia Reed could buy with a smile and a whisper of her own. The lawyer asked if I had a plan for where to live, how to separate accounts, what belongings I needed secured. I answered, my voice quieter than I intended, but sure. Yes. I'd started arranging everything. Walking out of that office, the sunlight felt sharper, cleaner, almost like it cut through me. For the first time in months, I was carrying something heavier than grief, I was carrying direction. At home, the air was heavy with the faint perfume Sophia left behind. She'd been here again. A scarf draped on the back of a chair, her lipstick-stained mug in the sink, evidence of her invasion. My house was no longer a home. It was a stage for their affair, and I refused to be their audience. I was packing when the door slammed. Ethan's footsteps echoed down the hall before he appeared in the doorway, eyes darting from the half-filled suitcase to the folder of documents on the nightstand. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. I didn't stop folding the sweater in my hands. "It's what you asked for, Ethan. A divorce." He laughed, but it was a brittle sound. "You're actually serious about this?" "Emma, it was supposed to be. God, you're overreacting." I set the sweater down carefully, smoothing the fabric flat. "Overreacting? You paraded her in front of me, in front of our friends, our family. You called it a show, but the only performance was you pretending we had nothing left." His jaw clenched, hands balling into fists at his sides. "Sophia didn't mean." "Don't say her name," I snapped, sharper than I intended. This isn't about her anymore. It's about me. I won't live like a ghost in my own home, watching you build your future with her. His face shifted, anger, confusion, maybe even fear, but it was too late. The part of me that once clung to him had burned away. You're throwing everything away, he said finally, his voice cracking. No, I said, lifting my chin. You did that the moment you chose her. The silence between us stretched, suffocating. He looked at me as though I'd slipped out of his grasp, like sand he couldn't hold on to. And maybe that was true. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one begging, waiting, hoping. I was the one leaving. The key clicked in the lock with a sound so different from the heavy thud of the house I'd left behind. This was lighter, crisper, like the very walls were breathing for me. My new apartment wasn't much. A one-bedroom walk-up with paint that had begun to peel in the corners and windows that rattled when the wind pushed against them. But when I stepped inside, suitcase in hand, it felt like mine. The first thing I did was place my mother's wedding ring, the one she'd left me, on the little ceramic dish by the sink. A promise not of eternal love, but of strength carried down. Then I draped my grandmother's quilt over the couch, its faded blues and golds instantly softening the room. With each memory I unpacked, a framed photograph of my parents in the garden, a stack of books Ethan had always teased me for keeping, the space grew warmer, more mine. I didn't have Sophia's perfume here, no lipstick stains on my mugs, no laughter that wasn't mine ringing in the hall. Just silence. Beautiful, unbroken silence. I stretched out on the small sofa, the quilt tucked around me, and for the first time in months I felt safe. Not happy, not yet, but safe. The next morning I scrolled through my phone, curiosity gnawing even when I told myself not to look. Ethan and Sophia had made sure no one could miss them. Photos of them at dinner, her hand tangled in his across the table. Captions like "Real love doesn't need permission" burned into my eyes. Mutual friends tagged them, laughing, raising glasses, pretending they hadn't seen me disappear. For a moment, humiliation pulsed hot through me. But when I set the phone down and looked around my apartment, the feeling changed. Their chaos, their noise, their desperate show, it wasn't mine anymore. I had escaped it. I began small rituals to claim my days back. Morning coffee on the balcony, even if the view was just the brick wall of the building across the alley. Evening walks through the neighborhood, passing strangers who didn't know my name, my story, my failures. There was freedom in anonymity, in not being Ethan's wife but just Emma. I opened the old cedar chest I'd brought from my parents' house and took out the lace tablecloth my mother had stitched by hand. It went on the tiny kitchen table, a reminder that my family's history was still with me, even as I carved out a future that no longer had Ethan in it. And for the first time since he said the word divorce, I allowed myself to breathe without feeling like I owed him a piece of that breath. I wasn't dressed for a confrontation. Just jeans, an oversized sweater, and my hair tied in a loose knot as I pushed a grocery cart through the aisles of the neighborhood market. The kind of quiet Saturday morning that had become my anchor, buying fruit, bread, and coffee, small luxuries I chose for myself. And then I saw them. Ethan's profile caught me first near the produce section, familiar as a scar you've carried too long. His head bent toward hers, Sophia's, her manicured nails tapping at his sleeve as she laughed at something on her phone. The sight turned my stomach, though not with the raw pain it once did. This time, it was more like looking at a painting I'd long since stepped away from, colors still garish, but no longer mine to interpret. Ethan noticed me before she did. His expression shifted, jaw tight, eyes darting. For a moment, the mask cracked. Guilt, fear, maybe even shame. "Emma," he said, voice low, careful, like he didn't want to draw attention. He moved toward me, as though the space between us wasn't already a canyon. I kept my grip steady on the cart. "Ethan." My tone was level, neutral, stripped of the desperation that once colored every word I said to him. Sophia finally turned, her eyes landing on me with a spark of triumph. "Oh, Emma." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Didn't expect to see you here." She leaned into Ethan, her hand slipping through his arm in a performance so practiced it reeked of insecurity. I didn't answer her. I adjusted the basket in my cart, picked up a head of lettuce, and placed it inside. My silence unsettled her more than any words could. Ethan tried again, his voice barely above the hum of the refrigerators. "Emma, we need to talk. Just 5 minutes. Please." I looked at him then, really looked. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes hollowed, his shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it. He was unraveling in ways I wasn't responsible for anymore. There's nothing left to say, I told him quietly, the words steady, deliberate. You wanted your choice, Ethan. You made it. Sophia's smirk faltered, just slightly. She tugged him closer, as though afraid he might slip from her grasp. She's just bitter, she said loudly enough for me to hear. Some people don't know how to move on. I met her gaze, finally, and smiled, a small, serene curve of my lips that said I wasn't playing her game. You're right, I said simply, I have moved on. And with that, I pushed my cart past them, leaving their little performance behind. My heart beat fast, yes, but not from weakness. From strength. From control. By the time I reached the checkout line, I realized my hands weren't shaking. My groceries were mine. My peace was mine. And nothing they flaunted could take that away. The calls began in the middle of the night. At first, I ignored them, silencing my phone and turning it face down on the nightstand. But the next morning, there he was again, Ethan. Emma, just pick up, please. Just 5 minutes, his voice pleaded through voicemail after voicemail. The desperation was palpable, a sharp contrast to the arrogance he'd worn so proudly when he first paraded Sophia in front of me. Back then, he thought I'd cling. That I'd never let go. Now, it was him who refused to loosen his grip. One evening, as I was leaving the community center after a volunteer shift, helping organize donations for families who'd lost their homes in a fire, I found him waiting near the curb. Leaning against his car, shoulders hunched, eyes tired. Emma, he said as I approached, his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. I stopped, adjusting the tote bag on my shoulder. You shouldn't be here. I had to see you. His throat worked around the words. Sophia isn't who I thought she was. We fight all the time. She doesn't get me the way you do. I almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was tragic, and so predictable. That's not my problem anymore, Ethan. He flinched. Don't say that. You and me, we've been through everything together. Childhood, college, the wedding, the house. You can't just erase that. I'm not erasing it, I replied evenly. I'm learning from it. His hand raked through his hair, a nervous gesture I knew well. I made a mistake, Emma. A huge one. But we can fix this. We can start over. I'll leave her. That's not the point. My words came out sharper than intended. You left me long before I left you. You don't get to crawl back now because she isn't what you wanted. For a moment, his mask slipped entirely. His eyes were wet, his face drawn. I still love you, he whispered. I felt the weight of that once. Those words used to anchor me, comfort me. Now, they were hollow, stripped of meaning by his choices. You love yourself, Ethan, I said softly. And you love the idea of me. But the real me? The one who's finally standing without you? You don't even recognize her. He reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. His fingers hovered in the air, then dropped. Mutual friends began reaching out after that, calls from old college mates, texts from family members. Ethan says he's sorry. Can't you try again? Everyone makes mistakes. But I had shifted priorities. My work at the community center gave me purpose. Reconnecting with my parents over Sunday dinners reminded me of roots deeper than Ethan. Even redecorating my apartment, one framed photo at a time, filled me with a sense of ownership over my life. He was still circling the ruins of what we once had. But I was already building something new. When I closed the door on him that night, as he stood in the hallway of my apartment begging for one more chance, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel sadness. I felt free. The walls of my apartment no longer felt bare. Slowly, with each week, I had filled the space with pieces of myself. The quilt my mother stitched, the photo of my father laughing in the garden, even the chipped vase I couldn't bear to throw away because it carried too many memories. But it wasn't just the walls that were filling. My life, too, was beginning to hum with voices that weren't echoes of Ethan. It started small. A neighbor knocked on my door because she'd locked herself out. A coworker invited me for coffee after a long shift. And then, there was Olivia Grant. I met her at the community center. She was volunteering, stacking books for a donation drive, her laughter spilling into the air like sunlight. She noticed me struggling with a too heavy box and hurried over. Careful. We don't need you breaking your back for charity, she teased, her eyes warm and kind. I managed a smile, setting the box down. Guess I'm not as strong as I thought. Or maybe you just need someone to share the load, she said simply. Then she extended her hand. Olivia. From that moment, she seemed to weave her way effortlessly into my life. She wasn't pushy like Sophia had been, clawing for attention. Olivia was gentle. She invited, never demanded. One evening, she coaxed me into joining her for tea at a little cafe near the center. "I know that look," she said as I stirred my cup absent-mindedly. "You're used to carrying everything yourself. But trust me, sometimes letting others in isn't weakness. It's survival." Her words landed heavier than she probably intended. My instinct was to bristle, to insist I was fine. But instead, I let myself breathe. "I used to think survival meant holding everything together," I admitted quietly. "Even when it was falling apart." Olivia didn't pry. She just nodded, her eyes soft. "Sometimes survival means letting go." We laughed later, swapping stories about childhood pranks and embarrassing first jobs. For the first time in what felt like years, I laughed without bitterness clinging to the edges. Soon, she introduced me to her circle, neighbors who gathered for board games on Fridays, friends who invited me to book clubs or weekend hikes. At first, I stood on the edges, hesitant, but each time Olivia made space for me, I found myself stepping in a little closer. One evening, after everyone had left and I was back in my apartment, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked lighter. Different. Not the woman abandoned in her own home, not the wife humiliated at a party, not the desperate figure clinging to a broken vow. For the first time, I saw Emma Carter, on her own, yes, but not alone. The betrayal still hurt, the scar still raw. But in this new circle, with Olivia's steady encouragement and kindness, I felt something I thought I had lost entirely: joy. And maybe, just maybe, hope. When the email came through, I almost didn't believe it. A promotion, not just a title, but a chance to lead a new project, one that could take me overseas for training. My manager's words replayed in my head: "You've earned this, Emma. You're ready." Me. Ready. I sat there, staring at the screen, remembering all the years I had folded my ambitions into neat little corners so Ethan could take center stage. The nights I stayed up waiting for him, the weekends I spent mending the pieces he scattered, the dreams I never dared voice because they might interfere with his. And now, there was a door wide open, and it had nothing to do with him. It was mine. I was still lost in that thought when I saw him. Ethan. Standing across the street, leaning against his car, as though time had rolled back and we were still us. For a heartbeat, my chest clenched the way it always had when he appeared unexpectedly, but then I saw his face. Haggard, desperate, stripped of the arrogance that once made him untouchable. "Emma," he called, crossing toward me. His voice cracked like an old record. I wanted to walk away, but something in me needed to hear him out, if only to finally close this chapter. He stopped a few feet from me, searching my eyes. "Sophia's gone. She never cared about me, not the way you did. It was all about her, always." I swallowed hard, steadying myself. "And what about me, Ethan? Did you care about me? When you let her into our home, when you humiliated me in front of everyone we knew, when you demanded divorce like it was some kind of game?" His shoulders sagged. I was stupid. Blind. I thought she made me better, but all she did was use me. You were the one who stood by me all these years. I see that now. Please, Emma. Let's start over. For a moment, the ache of memory pierced me, childhood laughter, teenage promises, the vows we whispered beneath trembling hands. But the ache no longer held me captive. I had already walked through fire, and I wasn't stepping back into the flames. I shook my head, my voice calm but firm. "No, Ethan. There's no starting over. You chose her. And in doing so, you lost me. I won't be your second choice, or your safety net. Not anymore." His eyes widened, wounded. "So that's it? After everything we've been through?" I drew in a slow breath. "After everything, yes. That's it." I turned, leaving him rooted to the pavement, his figure shrinking in my periphery. As I walked away, I felt the weight lift, not because I had forgotten, but because I had chosen. Later that night, I signed the acceptance letter for the promotion. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from anticipation. A fresh start. Not with Ethan. Not defined by betrayal. With me. The sunlight poured through the curtains of my apartment, warming the quilt draped across my lap. The city outside hummed with its usual rhythm, but inside, there was peace, a quiet that felt earned, not empty. It struck me sometimes how far I had come. Not long ago, my days had been filled with whispers in the hallway, Sophia's perfume lingering on my furniture, Ethan's voice sharpening whenever I dared question him. It had been chaos disguised as love, a cage built from years of history. Now, that chaos felt like a dream I had woken from. A bad dream, yes. But one I had survived. I thought of Ethan and Sophia, their drama still playing out somewhere beyond my horizon. Friends mentioned the occasional post, the inevitable fights and reconciliations splashed across their feeds. But their noise no longer reached me. They were like distant actors on a stage I'd walked out of, their voices muffled, their power gone. What mattered was here. The laughter around Olivia's table on Friday nights. The satisfaction of my work, of projects with my name at the helm. The simple joy of waking up to walls that held only my things, my choices, my life. I ran my hand across my mother's wedding ring, glinting softly on the chain around my neck. It no longer symbolized loss. It symbolized endurance, and the legacy of women who survived, who built anew when the world tried to break them. I smiled, a small, steady smile. I'm not the same woman anymore, I whispered to the empty room. And I wasn't. I was the woman who had faced betrayal and walked through it. Who had shed a life that wasn't hers anymore. Who had learned that independence wasn't loneliness, but freedom. They thought it was a game, a performance meant to rattle me, meant to keep me in my place. But when the curtain fell, I chose to leave the stage entirely. And in that choice, I found everything I had lost. I leaned back, letting the light bathe me, my heart unburdened, my path wide open. She thought it was a show, but when I walked away, I found my true life.